In the past, BenQ have made some pretty awesome monitors for gaming, for content creation, and generally just great monitors. Over the last couple of years, they've been a little bit quiet, at least on my end anyway, but nowadays they're back with this, the EL2870. This is a 4K HDR monitor with a 1 millisecond response time that they're quoting as excellent for kind of a wide range of things, from gaming to content creation to content consumption and really anything in between. To see if that's true though, let's have a look at it. So first things first, on the aesthetic side of things, this is not the prettiest monitor in the world. It's got some pretty thick bezels, and the lower bezel actually extends quite far out as well from the display, which does give it a bit more of a sort of office vibe than a kind of, just high-end monitor kind of vibe, but either way, it's still pretty nice. It is a little bit on the thick side though, and the stand is pretty limited in its functionality. You have a good amount of tilt, but that's basically it. If you want to turn the monitor around, you just physically pick it up and move it, and otherwise you don't really get too much kind of maneuverability. You do still get a VESA mount if you want to mount this to a monitor arm or anything and get some more adjustability, so that is nice to see, but overall it's a pretty bland aesthetic. It's a kind of grey overall, and nothing to really stand or shout about. In terms of inputs, you have two HDMI ports, one display port, an audio out jack, and of course your AC in as well. There's no real extra fancy things. There's no USB ports, USB hubs or anything. The only extra kind of fancy thing that you have is the HDR button that's on the bottom right hand side of the monitor. This allows you to turn on HDR both in a kind of emulated mode or turn it off if you fancy, and it will also let you turn it off if you've enabled it in Windows as well. And also one of their eye care functionalities, which is why it's part of the EL line, which we'll talk about in a second. Now, the eye care set actually comes in a number of kind of options. So you have the usual sort of low blue light filter, which you can change its sort of intensity in the menus using the under screen buttons, and then you can also use the more advanced eye care stuff, which uses the ambient light sensors and the sort of little underslung housing under the BenQ logo. This changes the overall brightness and a few of the other settings on the monitor if you have it enabled based on the ambient light, which basically means if you're in a dark room watching a film or whatever, it's going to be fairly dim and obviously not going to be kind of blinding you as much as if you're in bright daylight or in a studio like this and you're able to move pretty bright LED lights in front of it. So it is quite a nice feature, just overall kind of as a usability thing. In terms of the panel itself, it's actually pretty impressive. As we know, it's an HDR panel, so it does allow for high dynamic range. I would mention that the Windows support for this seems to be a bit buggy at times, and while they do seem to be addressing them as updates go, even the latest version of Windows still seems to have a couple of issues with HDR enabled. So you can run it in the emulated mode if you like, which can look a little bit better, but overall it's still a hit or miss kind of thing. And overall I would just generally, at least for now anyway, until support gets a bit better, probably leave it off unless you're manually turning on for things like watching films. I actually used my Datacolor Spider 5 to test the monitor's color gamut coverage. So it had a 93.6% coverage of the sRGB spectrum, 67% of the Adobe RGB spectrum, and 69.7% of the DCI-P3 spectrum, which is actually pretty decent overall. Certainly, kind of not the world's best. Obviously, you're missing a little bit on all of those, but it's certainly not terrible. In terms of viewing angles, side to side is pretty great. You'll be fairly happy with this. The only thing I would mention though is that top and bottom viewing angles are pretty awful. It has that sort of color shift, almost like polarization look when you go pretty early from below it. So make sure that you have this monitor correctly aligned to where you're sitting, and I probably wouldn't recommend having this one as a vertical monitor, because my experience of that is generally with viewing angles like this on the top to bottom, not that great. Now, BenQ claims that this is a perfectly capable gaming monitor, and to test that out I'm using the system that is attached to the bottom of this desk, which is an i7-7700 and an RX 480. Since this monitor also supports Freesync, I was using Freesync while gaming on this, using CSGO, still actually at ultra kind of very high settings, and I was very happy with the overall playing experience. While I wouldn't recommend this to a pro for, you know, playing fast FPS games like CSGO or Rainbow Six Siege or anything like that, I would recommend it for basically everyone else. Things like CSGO, even for someone like me who is not terrible at games like that, it was a still very enjoyable gaming experience, and I was very happy playing on it, had no issues. And of course, you know, more casual games or even things like driving racing games are going to look pretty awesome on this. Now, would I explicitly recommend this as a gaming monitor? Not directly. The overall kind of value is actually pretty high considering the panel that you get here. To compare that to the AOC U2870U, which is almost a direct competitor to this, well, that one has a little bit of a better style and better aesthetics. That one is a TN monitor, and while its viewing angles are pretty nice, the overall kind of color reproduction and stuff like that just aren't quite as good as this, and things like side-to-side viewing angles, this one kind of just pips it to the post. But overall, it's a pretty awesome value for money if you're looking for a monitor for a little bit of maybe slightly color sensitive work and, you know, kind of designing, video editing or whatever else, and a bit of gaming on the side, then this could be pretty awesome for you. Now, to answer the question I ask in all of these reviews, would I put this on my desk? I would actually say yes. It's a pretty decent monitor. I'm happy to game on it a little bit, happy to do design work and video editing, that sort of stuff on it. And while I personally don't have space on any of my desks right now, I am pretty happy to recommend this. It's overall a pretty decent value for money as well for an IPS and a 4K and an HDR monitor. And while it's not the best HDR experience, especially on Windows and stuff like that, and overall just generally my experience with HDR on versus off, I didn't see a massive difference, at least with this monitor. I would still overall recommend it, and it's still a pretty decent option. I'll leave an Amazon link to this monitor in the description down below. You can check out pricing when and where you watch this, and of course pick one up if you fancy. If you want to support the channel, then you can obviously check out the other links in the description. We've got the Patreon link, the merch link, the Amazon and Overclock UK affiliate links. There's even stuff like a Humble Bundle kind of monthly link down there too, so if you want to sign up for some games, you can do that too. And yeah, of course, if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. I would love to hear your thoughts on this monitor in the comments down below. Is this something you're interested in? Is this, you know, kind of future aspiration, or is this something you couldn't care less about? Let me know in the comments down below. And of course, if you have any questions, leave them down there too. There are plenty of other videos you can check out over there, and otherwise, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you all in the next video.